So, welcome, John.
Hi.
Such a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure mine.
Thank you for your time. What a crazy few weeks it has been, right? I mean, you've heard it all. We've heard it all. Bank runs, depegs. It's pandemonium out there.
To paraphrase, I think it was Reagan. He said, I'm an economist and I'm here to help. Scariest words you can possibly hear. Yeah, it shows that monetary policy is both important and very difficult. It's largely difficult because there are a lot of competing interests that aren't really focused primarily on monetary policy. Monetary policy is something that spills over into the broader economy and also into a lot of people's pockets, quite frankly. So making good policy as a government is incredibly difficult. We do know some things about what good monetary policy should do, at least in terms of the fundamental purposes of money. Money is supposed to be a unit of exchange, it's supposed to be a store of value, it's supposed to be a unit of account. Those are its functions, but it turns out that it also can stimulate economic activity in a real economy, and also it is a source for projects that governments like to fund. So those are the sort of competing factors, and hopefully, I think we've organized things at Geeq and actually in crypto generally, where we don't really have the same kind of competing problems.
Okay, that's amazing. And that's exactly the topic of today, mainly. It's to explore this monetary policy that we have at Geeq and to see why this is such a good idea and why we're going to implement it. So we've got a few questions that we've rounded up from the community and the ones we think they're really, really great for us to explain, for us to really understand the concept. And so let's start with those. So the first question would be, what is AMP in the context of Geeq?
The AMP stands for Algorithmic Monetary Policy. Monetary policy in general is made up as you go along, and it's been known for a long time, 50s, even before then, that the thing that really is damaging to economic policies generally, but monetary policy in particular, is uncertainty, is a lack of clarity. If people don't know how regulations are going to change, for example, they can't properly invest because the rug can be pulled out from under them. If the monetary policy can be changed at the drop of a hat, why would I believe that you're now on a deflationary course, or that you're trying to stimulate the economy, or you're not going to go back to your old drunken ways of printing money to fund whatever your projects happen to be? So it's the lack of commitment and the lack of trust that you have in governments it's been demonstrated. We really can't trust governments because they answer to too many people. And there are too many powerful interests that want things to happen in certain ways. If you could actually commit to a policy, though, then everybody would be able to take that into account. People wouldn't have to hedge. They would be able to undertake economic investments and make decisions, make long-term contracts, and so forth without having that concern. And that in itself is enormously stimulative. It creates economic activity. It creates, of course, demand for the money as well. So this is fundamentally what the AMP is. It's a statement of a policy that is predictable, and I'll show later, I guess, exactly how it is that it achieves the goals that I think are beneficial to the whole ecosystem.
Why does Geeq specifically need a monetary policy? What do we want to accomplish with that?
Geeq and cryptocurrencies generally are a form of money. In the case of Geeq, the primary purpose of the money is to incentivize and to pay the nodes that are doing the transactions. That's like paying bankers for keeping your money in a vault and for giving it out only on an appropriate basis. Basically, it's their guards and servants, that are taking care your financial demands. So we're unit of exchange, store of value, unit of account. That's what the money is meant to be. Why is it we need a monetary policy to support that? Well, there's a the more basic reason for it is that even small countries, even relatively large countries like England, countries like Italy, and certainly countries that are Uruguay and even smaller than that, their monetary base is not very large. It doesn't take very much leverage to have a tremendous effect on the value of that monetary base. And speculators have absolutely taken advantage of that. George Soros famously crashed the British pound. He continued to bet against the exchange rate peg that the Royal Bank had set up. He put his money where his mouth was, and eventually they ran out of foreign exchange, and the pound crashed, and they had to depeg. And that had a tremendously bad effect for England. It led to recession. It was a terrible social cost to inflict, but he got rich out of it. So that's his incentive. Well, cryptocurrencies are of course even smaller, and it's even easier to manipulate those types of currencies. So we really have a target on our back. The values, people want to anticipate the value. Really, the value is in part anticipation of the future values. The efficient market theory, not to say that markets find the right price, but the efficient market theory says that the best prediction of today's price, of tomorrow's price, of a stock, an equity, or anything, is today's price. That if we could anticipate that a stock or an equity was going to go up tomorrow, we'd buy it today as an arbitrage. So today's price has to be our best guess about what tomorrow's price is. And so that's a feedback. If we see something, if we see FUD, if we see somebody putting a lot of money to attack the value of a currency, any currency, crypto or otherwise, then we say, oh my God, I better get out while I can. And so it has this multiplicative effect. And the same thing happens in the other direction. If somebody starts to buy the currency and people think that's going to continue, then people hold the currency and they try to acquire more, and then the value goes up. So there's this sort of inherent feedback loop that goes in both directions. So now, what does that give us as a kind of money, as a unit of value, as a unit of account, as a store value? It creates an extremely risky asset. And if you're trying to use this for a store of value, for example, if I'm using it for retirement or I'm using it for this for a general investment, something which is risky, you discount. You have to take account of that risk. If you give me 7% with certainty, that's great. If you give me 8% in expectation, but with a variation between 0 and 20%, that's a lot less valuable to me because I'm not a variable. I have to live. I have to eat. So I actually have to have those resources available. So risky assets are per se less valuable than non-risky assets. So and especially if we're trying to make something useful as a unit of exchange. One of the things that Geeq is trying to do, for example, is work with supply chains. And famously, what supply chains have are very, very long payment windows. So you buy something, you make something, it's ordered from Japan or Indonesia. There's a contract, it's manufactured, it's packaged, it's shipped, it goes all the way finally to the final destination. It could be 18 months. And so people often don't get paid until that whole transaction is complete. Well, that exposes people to a tremendous amount of exchange rate risk and inflationary risk, whereas just the ordinary risk is somebody's going to go out of business. So that makes business very difficult. It means that we can't sell at the best prices because we have to discount for those risks. All right, so in that application specifically, risk is a terrible, terrible thing, and even ordinary currencies are not optimal. All right, so what's the solution? Well, there isn't really a solution, but we can make things better, and that's what the monetary policy is trying to do. So the short version of it, we want to create a known and consistent set of buy and sell offers at various prices. And so, as an example, let's say the exchange rate of Geeq, to pick something easy, is a dollar. It's not that a dollar is a particularly interesting peg, but whatever the peg happens to be, it's not. What's really important is the stability. If the price is a dollar and Geeq starts to go up in price, what the app proposes is to issue a certain amount of new Geeq on a schedule that is published and known. And that new Geeq goes into the market and fiat currency is received, dollars, for example. Those dollars are put in reserve. And if the price starts to go down, those dollars are used to make similar offers to buy. And so what this means is that if you're going to try to speculate, if you're going to try to change the price of Geeq, simply trying to chase people away with FUD or to say, wow, the price is going up, let's buy a lot, or the price is going down, you better exit. You can't do that very easily because there's these offers that are not going to be chased away. Ordinary people will be chased away because they have to speculate. They have to anticipate what other people are going to do. It's like we're all a bunch of chickens running around and saying, what are the other chickens doing? And we're trying to copy them because that's the right thing to do. Here, there's this really, really dumb chicken that's just buying and selling algorithmically without any concern for what future values might be. So that's something that's not trivial, and it makes it at least it makes it expensive to try to run that kind of operation. And it doesn't prevent it because if you're willing to invest enough, you can overcome that. But it lends a kind of stability. So it's like making the price pattern more viscous. Doesn't stop it, but it makes it more viscous.
How will AMP work for Geeq?
I guess I'd say this, that part of the motivation for doing something like this is that, right, it doesn't prevent volatility. The price can rise and the price can fall. The fundamental price equilibrium isn't determined by the AMP, actually. What it's determined by is the underlying demand for the money. And so the AMP just makes it slower to increase and slower to decrease. The value is slower to increase and slower to decrease. If there's demand for the money because the ecosystem gets large, because there are use cases that we're trying to develop, then the AMP will creep up, the value will creep up, and that will be the underlying value of Geeq. So creating those markets and creating that demand is very important and part of what we're trying to do. The other part of it is that we think that one of our main motivations for doing this is that one thing that that creates value and creates demand and creates interest is exactly this stability. If you're actually trying to use Geeq, let's say, for a micropayment to a platform for content, or you're trying to use it for a micro donation, or you're using it as a medium of exchange in a supply chain. Having increased monetary stability makes it a much more attractive way to a unit of account medium of exchange than other things that you might use as an alternative. So this really is aimed at trying to increase the demand. So the other thing is that with this policy, it's, as far as I'm aware, unique. I don't know of another platform that's trying to do something like this. I said that of course there's always an incentive to attack any kind of monetary regime because speculators can make money. I'm not against people making money, but I am against them making money at the expense of other people. If we have this AMP, if we have this increased cost of changing the price for your own profit, we hope that people will go to some other place to try these games. It's like every lock can be broken into, but if my house has a better lock than your house, then why are you going to come to my house? So that's the intention. It's better, it gets more use, and so we're aiming to do that.
The next question is actually very, very interesting from the community point of view, because the deflation part of the AMP gets overlooked quite often, and the emphasis is put on the inflation, so the increase in the token base. Can we have a way to not deal with either inflation or deflation, a monetary policy that doesn't do any of those?
Yeah. So I guess we have to define what inflation is and deflation. Inflation, there's a difference between inflation and the size of the monetary base, right? So the monetary base could be anything, but what inflation and deflation are really is the relative price of a currency compared to other currencies, or in more general terms of commodities, which are denominated in dollars. So what we're talking about is the impact, I suppose, of this monetary policy and not the monetary policy itself. Let's first of all think about when the AMP would put more tokens into the marketplace, for the purpose of establishing this buffer that buys tokens on the way down. It only does that if there is an exogenous increase in the price of Geeq. So technically what that would be is a deflation, right? When the price of Geeq goes up, that means that it's worth more relative to eggs and butter and dollars. So that's deflationary. That means the value of the money is going up relative to things. In that deflationary environment, more Geeq is issued for the purpose of stability. So it is the deflation that is driving the increase of the monetary base, not the monetary base that is driving inflation or deflation. So the only way the monetary base increases is if there is inflation going on, deflation that's happening otherwise because of increased demand. On the way down, what would be inflation as the price of Geeq decreases, that's when the fiat is used to rebuy Geeq. And so, in fact, the monetary policy is trying to put the brakes on inflation by buying Geeq and taking it out of circulation. So it's what's called a countercyclical policy. The cycle of the value decreasing is a cause for putting more dollars into the system to take Geeq out. The value of Geeq increasing is an opportunity to put more Geeq into the market to generate this reserve that can then be used to increase stability.
In this sort of system, how are everyone else's incentives aligned? Or how do we bring everyone together to function in the system?
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of players. I'm a game theorist by trade, and I've actually been working most recently. I'm going to a conference in London in a little while on the intersection between economics and computer science in various ways. A very interesting conference. But I've been trying to work on a paper for that. And part of this is trying to model a proof of stake versus a proof of honesty chain. And it's very hard because there are lots of players and lots of strategies. So, of course, what we have to do is simplify in this case. But who are the players that we might think about in a cryptocurrency market? Well, of course, there are, you can think of Geeq as a company, perhaps as a player. It's sort of amorphous. Lots of people are in that, and lots of people have different kinds of incentives within that organization. There are the holders of Geeq. Some of those are speculators. They have some interests that may differ from others. Some people are interested in having a non-central bank currency just for the freedom that it provides and the protection, in this environment that is becoming increasingly scary. So I don't know how many geeks are in that category, but there's certainly a lot of people that are Bitcoiners and Ethereum heads that are absolutely in favor of this kind of controlling your financial assets and privacy. I'm very much in favor of that, of course, too, and that's one of my motivations. And then there are people that want to actually use a blockchain, and that's we're talking to quite a few people right now that want to use it in the context of showing regulatory compliance, controlling access to medical records in a way that's auditable, doing various kinds of supply chain and chain of custody, distributed business processes, and then of course micropayments and so forth. So there are these use cases, and for that, there are a lot of things you have to do to make the currency and the platform useful. So what are the incentives here? Well, the incentives I think that are most important on the side of Geeq and all of us that are trying to build the platform are, at least as I perceive them, it's to make the platform as useful as possible, to try to get as much penetration into the various use cases that Geeq can help with. There's a trust deficit that exists right now in the world. There's too many people. People are not too many people. There's a lot of people, and people don't know each other. They have lots of different interests. They don't have the sense of community because they're from different places, and yet we have to somehow work together. And creating a platform that can generate these kinds of economic and even non-economic relationships without requiring trust is something I think is a very important social contribution. And so building the platform for those purposes, that's really what I'm focused on. Now, there are monetary rewards that might come with that as well, of course, and so that reinforces those incentives. But those rewards only really come if the platform is successful. If the platform is not successful, then there's nothing. So I think that what is it that Geeq Corporation is getting? Start there. We have two tracks. We've got the public track and we've got the private track. So the private track is trying to create closed instances of a private blockchain that might compete with something like Fabric, and to generate these kinds of data structures that are useful to enterprises and their customers. So there, it tracks exactly on the same line as the public in the sense that the platform is identical. It's just not publicly facing. It has to have all the same features. And so this allows us to work in the same direction without depending upon one source of incentive. Also, that private track spills over into the public track, because if there is a use of this as a protocol, there are elements of things that even enterprises do that need to be public facing. These are things like reporting regulatory compliance, or allowing users to actually interact instead of partners. If you have a partner, you can, another enterprise or an employee, you can put it on a closed system. But if you're trying to interact with a customer, it's got to be something the customer can see. And so that has to be an open system. So if you're already using, Oracle in your back end, you're probably going to use Oracle on your user interface.
How does the come into this whole idea of incentives, monetary incentives, but also to fund Geeq, to fund its work, to fund the team's work?
Yeah. So, when we started this, I have to admit that obviously I've learned quite a lot over the time that we've been working this. I started this as a game theorist and some knowledge in cryptography and computer science and so forth. And, I worked on it mainly as something that was sort of intellectually interesting. I'm a woodworker, among other things, and doing something that is well crafted is just a real pleasure. So that's what I enjoy doing. So I tried to craft this as something that fixed a lot of the problems that I saw in other platforms, and also extended usability in various ways. So that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that, actually. But what I didn't realize is all the infrastructure that has to go along with this. I like a math problem, so I did the math problem. But that's not enough. Then we have to say, what's it useful for? Well, I don't know. It's useful. Come on, leave me alone. But so we had to think about that. And then we also had to think about, how can it be used? How can we facilitate its use? And so let me give you some examples of the things that have to be done for this to be successful. One of them is there has to be a secure wallet structure created. If you can't keep your keys safely, then you're out of luck. The existing wallets, I don't want to cast shade on anybody, but things like MetaMask and various other interfaces, I personally, speak for myself, find them unpleasant and very difficult to use. Whenever I have to do anything in crypto, I can do it, but I kind of dread it. It's a pain to do it. Part of that is sensible because there are security arrangements to keep track of your keys. One of the things that we've done with Geeq is we have this idea of a high accessibility wallet. So this is where we would put a small amount of assets from a more secure wallet that you would use on a daily basis. I think of it as having cash on hand in your wallet. Yeah, you keep most of your money in your bank, but if you walk around, you need some money that you can access. So if I'm trying to buy content for 5 cents, or I'm making minor purchases, putting that in a way that is less secure but also much more available, so I can push a button and then the payment is made. Well, that's how people actually can use things. I'm not. It's even difficult to, for example, use a credit card. Use a credit card online, I've got to fill it all in. I've got to put my address in. So that's not terribly hard, but it's a 30-second iteration to make a payment. I should be able to make a payment with the push of a button, and that's part of what we're trying to do. So doing that requires a different kind of wallet structure, a different kind of UI UX, and also we have different sorts of transactions that are not just simply financial transactions that have to be supported in the wallet. For example, NFTs in the context of a game, being able to access those, use those, and perhaps trade those. That's another wallet function. And if it's a pain, you have to go search. You've got to go through files. You've got to press your ledger or whatever to make things happen. That's makes it very hard to get adoption. So upshot, the wallet has to serve many purposes. There's this high accessibility wallet. There's somebody that might have assets they want to keep. There's a wallet for somebody that might want to work in a game particularly. There's a wallet for somebody that is just doing notary transactions. There's also APIs that have to be written to support that. If we're trying to be a data backend, for example, an IoT ecosystem, well, those devices might be writing notary transactions every 10 seconds. And so we have to have a way that they can sign things and feed it into a chain. And so that's a set of APIs that's specific for that. There are APIs that might be specific for banks, for regulators, for supply chain. Everybody has a need, and if it's not done in a way that's easy and secure, it's no good. So that's one part of the infrastructure. Another part would be a block explorer. There's Etherscan. That's not free to run. The data has to be collected by the Ethereum Foundation, and they have to offer it, which means they have to have servers up there. They have to do database searches. They have to present things to you. So that's a voluntary action they do to support the use of the ecosystem. If you didn't have that data available, you wouldn't use Ethereum because you wouldn't know what you had. So that's it. Running the servers and offering public access to data like that is not free. So that's another kind of infrastructure. Yet another would be getting into exchanges. Exchanges have to do diligence. They require fees. If it wants to be traded any place, then somebody has to undertake the actions of filling out the paperwork, making regulatory compliance, and also paying the exchange to be listed. Customer acquisition. If we want this to be a large ecosystem, we have to convince people that this is good and easy. That means we have to have people going out there and try to sell stuff. So this is stuff that benefits all of the ecosystem. The bigger it is, everybody wins. If you own Geeq and we're successful in what we're doing, this increases demand, and you can speculate about, not speculate, but you can make your estimations about what the impact of that is. All right, that's not free. That takes a lot of money and a lot of investment. And it also takes investment on a continuing basis. You know, this was, if you're just going to do something and then pull the rug, we just have to pump and dump, right? You don't have to have any long run plan. If there's not a continuing source of value for somebody to do these things, well, then they don't get done. And so that's part of what the AMP does, that it's sort of a positive reward and a positive feedback. If we are able to create demand because we are able to generate these interfaces, these APIs, these customers, these listings, well, we hope that that will increase the value of Geeq. If the value of Geeq increases, then the AMP issues more tokens. Those tokens are partially going to support this effort. And so that effort then will be a feedback that we hope increases the value of Geeq. So there's an incentive to increase the value of Geeq because part of the value of the tokens comes to the company. But then there's an incentive to reinvest those in trying to create these interfaces and these use cases and these listings, because that feeds back into an increase in the value of the token. So, you know, honestly, I'm a little bit defective. I'm not actually all that excited about the value of the token. I know I should be. I probably shouldn't say that. I'm really excited about the use of the token. You know, so I want the token to be used. I want it to be valuable. Alternative. So, you know, that's the reason I built these part of the reason, at least, I built the AMP this way, so that there would be resources that would allow this to happen. So I view this as a virtuous circle. That's the reason why it's structured that way, and that's why part of it goes to Geeq. Part of it also goes to the community. Community is another way to build uses. And the rest of it, of course, goes to supporting the stability of the token. So all of it is actually dedicated to different dimensions of trying to increase the fundamental value and use of the currency.
Will AMP always have to create new tokens, or will it get to a point where there are enough funds and tokens from buying and selling that it no longer needs to mint anymore?
So you've used a word that doesn't really have an economic meaning, and that word is need. So this is what I tell my students. There is really no such thing as need. There is want, right? Need might be a very strongly expressed want, or it might be a conditional. You know, I need a car. Well, really what you're saying is that if I don't have a car, I can't get to work, right? So it's a conditional. Or maybe you want a car very bad. All right, so need sort of has a what we would call a normative context. It's not really clear what a need would be. So what we're trying to do is craft a policy that achieves a purpose, right? And the one that I described here is far from unique. There are lots of different ways one could approach it. The parameterizations are not magic by any means. In fact, I chose these parameters because they seem to be plausibly proportionate with the objective of the AMP. There is no empirical evidence here. You know, this has never been done before. So there's no empirical basis for saying that this is the best policy, the right policy, the optimal policy. Don't know what exactly the right thing to do is, but it seems to me that this is proportionate. Now, if you're thinking of, the question is, would we ever be able to stop it? Well, yes. In fact, we would also be able never to start it. You know, so the question is, when do you start? Well, the current plan is to start probably at least. Well, the current plan is not. We don't have a current plan, honestly, but our thinking here is that we will certainly not start it sooner than a year after mainnet launches. That's the current thinking, and we might use whatever unissued tokens are unreleased. They're all issued, but unreleased tokens. Release those slowly as a sort of a pseudo amp to build up resources and things like that. It may be more than a year. We're not fixed on that. Part of the value of the amp, though, is its certainty. So if it becomes uncertain, if we don't know if we're going to do it, we might stop it. Well, that detracts a lot of its value, because now you say, supported up till now, but now it's free. Now it's going to happen. I can attack it again. Or I don't really know how much is going to be used to defend against an attack. So consistency and transparency are something that support the effectiveness of any kind of monetary policy. Having said that, though, there isn't anything magic about anything here. It doesn't have to happen. It doesn't have to happen in this way. It could stop at any point if you decided it would. Our plan is not to. Our plan is to be consistent, to do what we said we were going to do. And I just point out that in the event that we have collected too much, we have as much as we need, whatever need means. In that event, the only way that could ever happen is if we've really been successful. If the value of Geeq has gone up to such an extent that there's this very large fiat reserve that is there to defend it. And to me, this again should give people comfort. If there's a whole bunch of fiat sitting there waiting to defend any kind of price decrease, well, that's an asset that is much less risky to hold, and also much less risky to attack, and much more useful in the ordinary uses in commerce. The answer, I guess, again, yes, we could, but we probably almost surely will not, because that would defeat the purpose of certainty.
Let's see if you want to delve deeper into, for example, the timing for AMP to become active.
Yeah, so the original thought was to implement it directly at mainnet. I mean, it seemed like the logical time to do it. At mainnet, though, there will be a lot of tokens that are locked up in various ways. For example, the tokens that are supposed to go to the team or to certain of our investors are released over the course of 2 years. So it's not that mainnet is launched and suddenly all these tokens are free to be traded. We of course, obviously that's a bad idea. So we let them out over a gradual period, so that those are introduced slowly. So that unfortunately doesn't build up any reserve to defend the currency, but it on the other hand does increase the effective monetary base. Trying to do the AMP at the same time before all those tokens are actually in circulation is probably a bad idea. So I think our plan is to wait until all, or at least the great majority of the tokens are free and clear and in circulation before we start the AMP. That seemed to be the best policy.
How is it that AMP can be adjusted once it's live, and what are your current thoughts on it? How do you think about this?
I'm of two minds about it. One is there's huge value in simply saying this is what it is, and locking it in. There isn't really a way to do that. There might be a way to do it contractually, and I don't mean smart contract. I mean do it contractually as a legal obligation. There's a tremendous value in having that certainty. Reason that people don't trust governments is they don't keep their words. They change their mind. New circumstances arise. We want to do something different. Well, that's a clear conflict of interest. I'd say things have changed. I want to do it differently. Well, if I benefit from those differences, then what are you going to say? On the one hand, I'm strongly inclined never to change anything. On the other hand, things can be changed. There's no way to really prevent them, or no really obvious way to prevent them being changed. And as I said before, the parameters we've chosen are plausible parameters that seem to make sense, but it's in the absence of any actual evidence, because there is no evidence. So adjusting, if there was a way to adjust the policy in a way that did not undermine trust, that would of course be optimal. Whether or not that is true or not, I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to it. So yes, it's possible to adjust. And I imagine if there are overwhelming reasons, if there's evidence that that things should be adjusted one way or the other, or else bad things will happen, there's certainly an amount of these are bad parameters that probably would make us adjust it. But I guess I'm conservative in the sense that I am loath to change unless there is strong evidence that there is a very, very good reason to change.
Fantastic. Okay. Any closing remarks on AMP as a whole?
Let's see. Well, it is something that is unique to Geeq as far as I'm aware. Every country has a monetary policy. Everybody that issues a currency has a monetary policy. And that there's a reason for it. It's because the world is a dangerous place, and there are people, speculators. There's people on Wall Street. There's George Soros. There's even hostile nation states that have an interest in the exchange rate and the value of people's currency. Attacking a currency, is a way to really damage a country. More often, actually, countries inflict wounds on themselves, and not to pick people out. But Turkey at this moment has tremendous inflation, and they're getting to the point where it's going to be very hard to service a debt, to make anybody lend to them, and issuing more currency is just going to lead to hyperinflation. So, eventually you sort of wear out that golden goose. So bad monetary policy is really bad. It's bad for everybody, bad for governments, bad for people, bad for trade, bad for economic activity. The policies that cryptocurrencies have, to the extent they do, are really limited. What they're mostly there for is to create some limited incentives for perhaps the developers of the platform, or more often the nodes and validators that support the platform. Issue a currency, and that's what you pay your validators in. That's not really a monetary policy. There's a monetary policy that's sort of a roadkill that comes from that decision, but it doesn't have anything to do with supporting the underlying non-node ecosystem. It doesn't support the users of the currency. It doesn't support any of the use cases, so it simply is a way to pay people. So and most often these are inflationary policies like mining. Ultimately, you do have to pay people for the work that they do. You wouldn't have Fort Knox and pay your guards minimum wage, because then they're going to take your gold, right? So you have to make sure that the people that are entrusted with your security are paid enough that they're not tempted to violate your trust. And so our policy is first of all to generate this way. There's no way to pay people to generate security except within the blockchain itself. So you have to have the cryptocurrency on the chain to actually effectively create these incentives and pay people. But then, having done that, well, the currency has to have value. We can't just be a Ponzi scheme where people are paid this fictitious currency for the actions of validating a chain. There's no external use for it. So our policy then is to find these use cases, try to extend the demand for the money, and part of that is to actually have a genuine monetary policy that creates a currency which is more dependable and predictable, and therefore is something that you can contemplate holding for a period of time over a supply chain counterparty action, or hold some in reserve for 3 months so that you can feed it to decentralized platforms for content. So that stability makes those use cases much more likely, in turn increases, we hope, the value of the currency, in turn increases the return to people that are actually securing the chain. So as I say, I think the whole thing as I vision it, is a virtuous cycle that just returns value to everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And we hope these answers help clear up the concept of AMP a bit, and make everybody understand a bit more about Geeq's monetary policy. So if people were to want to learn a bit more about AMP, where would you send them exactly?
That's a good question. I don't know. So we have things on that are on the site. There's a discussion. There's a white paper about it. The way I learned about it, of course, is in grad school. There's a nice little book by Laidler on monetary demand, which actually is sort of the core of it. The interesting thing, actually kind of cool about cryptocurrencies is the kinds of things that macroeconomists have been thinking about in terms of monetary policy and the demand for money actually apply exactly in these cryptocurrency environments. They're a laboratory that don't have the competing effects of politics and real people that have to eat, and therefore you have to worry about tax systems, and you have to worry about interest rates, and you have to worry about funding various social programs. All of those things are what make monetary policy difficult, because you have these competing interests. It's not so. In the case of cryptocurrencies, you're just trying to create a useful medium of exchange. That's it. You're trying to create a use case for this thing that lubricates the economy. And so you can really take quite a pure look at how you would do this if you were free to design what you wanted to. So looking at books like that relating to the demand for money would be another way. Look at read newspapers to see exactly read news to see exactly how not to run a monetary policy. If you look at China, the U.S., Russia, the EU, my view is these are terrible monetary policies, and you can see the impacts of these, and they're sort of made up. It almost seems like drunken sailors as they're just running down the street and saying, "Well, here's the thing, let's do that." They're unpredictable. People don't keep their words. They don't. The reasons they give you for doing something are not really the reasons. The impacts of their decisions are tremendous and far-reaching, and many of them Janet Yellen should understand them, but she certainly doesn't talk about them. So I guess another way to learn about it is to contrast this policy of predictable price supports compared to our Fed, which says, what about another $1 trillion for some reason? And I'm not trying to pick on anybody in particular. It's very hard to be in politics. You have to respond to your constituents, and we have the luxury of being able to say this is it, and we're going to hold the line because it's in everybody's interest. But in politics, you don't have that, and the results we can see.
All right. Well, you heard John. If you want to check out more about this, visit our website at geeq.io, or just drop by. We've got a Telegram channel, Geeq Official. We'll definitely get into a discussion with you there, a conversation, help you learn more. That's it for today. We're looking forward to next time. Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Flavia. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.